the more detailed that you can make this feedback, the better. So break out your notes, and you should be fully engaged in their evaluation for 60 minutes. You should be writing down literally everything they do, where they stand, what are they doing. You're gonna learn a lot in the process by doing that. You're gonna learn what you like, what you don't like, what they do well, what they don't do well. But be overly critical, because that's the point. All right, guys, welcome back to Jerk Block Talk. Jason Fernandez here at CrossFit Rife. This is something I've been wanting to do for a while, and I just happen to be doing it. So we've got a newer coach running a class, and I want to talk a little bit about like how to do class evaluation. So today's workout is it's a rowing sprint EMOM, where it's a 30-minute EMOM where they're just rowing 30-second intervals with some fixed rests in there. So here's what I would tell you. There's no right or wrong way to do evaluations. A lot of people like to use templates, which is great if you're just starting, and it gives you some idea of like things I should be looking for. Eventually, I think using a template has more downsides than upsides, simply because it's restrictive in nature. So I've done a previous video on this before, but I want to talk a little bit more in depth about like what that should look like. So what I'll generally do is just open up the notes in my phone, and so for instance, we're 37 minutes into the class, and this is the amount of notes I've taken thus far, right? And so there's a couple of ways you can do this. So I think you should be able to do it both ways, and maybe do them both ways simultaneously, or take one and convert it into the other. So most of you guys have seen the video on like how to create a lesson plan. We'll put it up here. And you can do your evaluation based on that lesson plan. So it's a 60-minute interval, and I'm just kind of making check marks. And that's kind of what I'm doing here with the notes. It's just not in a visual format of that timeline. But what I would recommend doing is, as soon as the class starts and you start evaluating, I would write down literally everything that they do. Write all the time marks, what time they started the brief, what time they finished the brief, things that they said in the brief, what did they cover in the brief, what did they not cover in the brief, what time did they start the general warm-up, what time did they start the specific warm-up, what did they say, were there things that were technically incorrect, did they get a sufficient amount of warm-up in there, what time did they start the workout, did they have a break before the workout to let people go to the bathroom, what time did they finish the workout, was there a cool down, did they get the stuff like names on the board. So the more detailed that you can make this feedback, the better. So break out your notes, and you should be fully engaged in their evaluation for 60 minutes. You should be writing down literally everything they do, where they stand, what are they doing. You're gonna learn a lot in the process by doing that. You're gonna learn what you like, what you don't like, what they do well, what they don't do well. But be overly critical, because that's the point. Because I can take some of this stuff and clean it up later, and a lot of your notes in the beginning when you start doing this aren't gonna make any sense. Because they're just your thoughts on the fly, but you can clean them up and then give them and then present them to the coaches doing that. So a couple things you should be looking at when you're giving an evaluation. General timeline, what does that timeline look? Does it match? Does it come out to be a good lesson plan with regard to like time allocated to each portion, warm up, workout, cool down, and then those sub pieces there, general, specific, WOD, brief, cool down. Other thing you should be looking at, group management. What do the logistics of the class look like? Was it organized? Was it a shit show? Were things set up in a mindful fashion where there's good flow for the classroom? With regard to seeing and correcting, how much time was spent correcting movement? Was it a lot of instruction and no corrections? Things like that. Are they giving a lot of cues? Do they only give one type of cue? Is it visual, verbal, or tactile? Or is it good spread, or is it only one of those 3 types? How many do they give? What is their interaction with the class? Like, Rebecca's doing a good job interacting with people just because that's her personality. So those are a couple things. The other thing is, what is their general presence and attitude? And then lastly, like, when it comes down to the teaching versus seeing and correcting, what does that balance look like? Is there a good balance of seeing and correcting versus teaching? Or is it a lot of instruction with little to no or less of the athletes doing things, right? So I've done another video on that, which puts up there too. But those are some general things that you should write down, and you'll be able to figure out those if you go through and write down the full timeline of the workout. So I've got everything on here from, you know, what time she started the brief, things she covered in the brief, what time she broke from the warm-up, what they did in the warm-up. Then she had another break in there when she was discussing a little bit of the workout. Some things in the general warm-up, things that she discussed in there about damper settings. So, I mean, like, the more detailed, the better, because you can clean this up and send it out. But I wanted to talk about how to give coach eval. Like, there's no right or wrong way. But what I would tell you is the more specific, the best feedback I've ever gotten was always in this form. And this is generally how we do it for most of our coaches, is we get very, very specific, and you just sit off on the side and you just literally write down every single thing that you see and you watch and hear. Because that way you can break it down and you'll find trends in there with different coaches, that they do this really well, they don't do that really well. But you have to write down everything. And at first, if you're not really sure, then use a template. Be like, hey, I just need to check these boxes with regard to the template. But after a while, once you're good with the template, then you really want to basically have a chronologically broken down assessment of their class, so that you can give them essentially what will be a play-by-play of their class and give them a critique on things that they can improve. And the beauty of this is, if you do it, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to become much more perceptive about what is a good class and what is a bad class, and where people can do some very minor things to improve their class. In a lot of instances, we're not talking about major things. We're talking about little minor things, about putting equipment there or saying this, not that. So just a couple things. I thought this would be valuable because I'm doing it right now. And then the other thing that we just started doing is we house all these evaluations in a central location that everybody can see, so that every single person has access to those evaluations, because if it's good for one person, chances are it's good for everybody else. So if you guys have questions about evaluations, different things that we're doing, general things that I see for coaches that are doing that kind of stuff, go ahead and put those in the comments. And if you like this content, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. See you next time. See ya.